Back now to my exclusive interview with Bill Ayers, the man behind one of the most violent radical groups of the 1960s and 70s, and his reaction to the evidence that despite his claims, his group went way beyond vandalism. You guys got to the point where you considered murder, and you acknowledged that yourself. It got to the point where the property damage wasn't good enough for you, and you decided on mass murder, planning to bomb a military dance. Now, here's a bit of you and your fellow weathermen discussing that planned bombing with a nail bomb of a military dance you were going to bomb years later.
Terry, more than probably anyone else, represented the view that it was too late for any kind of reconciliation inside this country, and that the best that we could do was to bring about a catastrophic series of actions.
They had decided to set off the bomb at a non-commissioned officer's dance at Fort Dix. The idea being that there are no innocent in this war of aggression.
What we wanted to do here was deliver the most horrific hit that the United States government had ever suffered on its territory.
Yes, what I said was exactly right, that Terry had decided that it had to go further, and thank goodness it didn't, which I also said at the same moment.
But you understand, Professor, is that what began for your group as outrage over mass killings then turned into a plan to kill hundreds of Americans. Did you not cede the moral high ground?
Oh, absolutely, but for that was true for a few people, and it was one of the things we split on. So I write about it extensively in Fugitive Days. You should read it. It is an extensive explanation, and I don't defend it.
But
I think
as I hear you sitting, you don't sound remorseful.
But you want me to be remorseful for something I didn't do, rather than for the things I did do.
This is your group, Professor Ayers.
No.
This isn't some splint.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is.
That's not true.
It is true. This is the Weather Underground that was going to bomb military officers.
That's right, and we criticized it then and now. And we said it's wrong. It was wrong. It is wrong.
Professor, the only reason it didn't happen, it didn't happen is because the bomb blew up on those who were making it. And when it blew up, your girlfriend, Diana Oughton, was killed.
That's right.
And you later described her death as valiant.
Well, I later described an imaginary, nobody knows what happened, but what I imagine in Fugitive Days is her trying to stop that horrendous event from taking place. So that's how I describe it. And I describe it, I don't say that she was valiant. I don't say that.
You describe her death as valiant.
No, I talk about her trying to stop what would have been a horrendous
That's
thing.
Your imagination. How do you know she was against that bomb?
Know.
She was in the townhouse when it exploded.
That's exactly right. And no one knows. You don't know. John Murtaugh doesn't know. But the idea that somehow this is the moral equivalent of 6,000 people a week being killed strikes me as nuts. We were destroying property, and in the course of discussion, some people thought we should go much further.
Your critics say when you make that argument, you sound like Adolf Hitler. Now, this is from the same documentary that we've been pulling clips from. This is a man who was part of the Weather Underground talking about you, saying you were closer to Hitler than you were to Gandhi. Listen.
They brought themselves, they were not brought, they brought themselves to that point. To the point at which they were ready to be mass murderers. This is mass murder we're talking about. They came to this conclusion, which is the conclusion that was come to by all the great killers, whether Hitler or Stalin or Mao, that they have a grand project for the transformation and purification of the world. And in the face of that project, ordinary life is dispensable.
That's Todd Gitlin. He was not in the Weather Underground. He was a leader of Students for Democratic Society. He's a professor at Columbia.
The predecessor.
And that quote to me is nuts. So you want to talk about who's in that grand tradition of destroying thousands, millions of people? It's the American war in Vietnam, where John McCain was in fact dropping bombs from the air on civilians, and he did it consistently.
And when the Weather Underground went into a townhouse and put together a bomb with nails in it.
Terrible thing.
And allegedly,
I agree with you.
And allegedly
Terrible
killed
thing.
a police officer and bombed the home of John Murtaugh,
didn't kill a police
federal
officer.
judge with a 9-year-old boy in his bed.
He didn't kill a police officer, and so if
Deny it, but there's evidence to the contrary.
If there were evidence to the contrary, why isn't somebody on trial?
Doesn't mean they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well,
but the San Francisco Police Union says they believe you did it.
It's frankly not true. And John Murtaugh, that is also not true, but he has his opinion, but nobody was hurt or killed. The townhouse, as I said, was a terrible, terrible deviation.
Well,
and
the communique
I'm glad that it
was
didn't
issued
happen.
by the Weather
But
Underground claims credit for the Murtaugh home bombing.
Meanwhile, 6,000 people a week are being murdered.
Now, you made that point. That's back to the ends justify the means.
Is that not the slippery slope towards Mao and Hitler and the other?
That's back to the ends justify the means.
No, it's not.
Let me get back to this.
It's absolutely not.
Let me
Unless you say the United States is saying the ends justify the means, which they often do say.
You got to the point where your group had to go underground after the townhouse bombing, where the bomb exploded.
Well, we decided to go underground. We didn't have to.
You went underground. Yeah. While underground, you stole, you lied, you hid, right? Any disagreement?
Right.
You stole.
Onward, yes.
Yeah, you did. You wrote about it in your book.
We stole ID.
You stole purses. You stole wallets.
Well, yeah.
You stole money.
Some.
You ripped off dead babies' identities.
Right.
Yeah. And yet, the violence continued. Just because you went underground didn't mean the violence stopped.
What violence?
Well, June 9th, 1970, you bombed the New York City Police headquarters.
Okay, so now again, you're
March 1st. Let me just list it.
Yeah.
March 1st, 1971, you bombed the U.S. Capitol. May 19th, 1972, you bombed the Pentagon. January 29th, 1975, you bombed the State Department. That's what I mean by violence.
Yeah, that's actually destruction of property. So you can call it violence, but to equate it to the murder of human beings is nonsense. It doesn't
You realize
equate.
people could have been hurt. You admitted that at the beginning of the interview.
I said people could have been hurt, and thank God they weren't. And we made every attempt not to, and they weren't.
Do you appreciate the recklessness of that?
I don't say it wasn't reckless.
Who are you to potentially endanger the lives of those individuals who may have been in or around those buildings?
I don't say it wasn't reckless, and I don't say it wasn't illegal. It was illegal. We crossed lines of legality.
It's so much bigger than that,
We crossed lines of legality, maybe common sense. You could have murdered
somebody with those bombs.
And we didn't. But actually, the people who were conducting the war in Vietnam did actually murder people.
And so the answer is to then make yourself a murderer as well?
Do the ends of the fight against communism justify those means?
But you're answering a question with a question. Why don't you account for your own
I will, and you account for your reporting, because one of the things that
this is all from your book, sir.
Yeah, I know, but you talk about lies. Nothing's more clear than the systematic lying of the American government to get us into war after war after war.
You keep dodging. You keep pointing to the government and not taking accountability.
No, I've said again and again, and I've said it in print, what I'm responsible for, what I'm not responsible for. But it's hard to get me to admit that I'm responsible for something I didn't do.
Well, you
keep saying the
you did these bombings, the Weather Underground. You admitted that Weather Underground did 20 bombings. That's your group.
And I would not apologize for destroying property in defense of stopping 6,000 people.
And as soon as it crosses over to somebody being injured, you deny it.
No, I think that would have been a real problem.